Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, March 10th, and this is the meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. We have two items on our agenda today. The first is a zoning text amendment on a matter relating to parking lots and how they can be used. And then our second is returning for what hopefully will be our final committee session on telecommunications and wireless infrastructure. So the first item, Council President Tom Hucker and myself have co-sponsored legislation or a zoning text amendment. And I don't know if Mr. Hucker, you want to make any opening comment. We could certainly provide that. If you'd like to say something now, that'd be fine.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you taking up this this little housekeeping bill. I know in Montgomery County often we pride ourselves on our ability to create bureaucratic mazes, but in this case, and sometimes there's an argument on that side where public health or safety are concerned, but in this case, there's really, I think, no good public interest argument to retain the multiple levels of review that this bill attempts to address. So I'm grateful for the support of the Planning Board. Glad the Chairman could join us today. Grateful for all your work on this and Levu's work on this, and for the support of the Planning Board and the staff. And I think we can probably get right to it. Thank you.
Very good. So I'll ask Levu. I challenged her to describe this describe this by speaking rather than reading. So we'll see. And then Chairman Anderson, appreciate Planning Board's review. We may turn to you for any additional comment.
Absolutely. Good morning, council members. So the purpose of this ZTA is basically to allow the Planning Board approval of a site plan rather than going through the conditional use process for surface parking in residential zones. So this applies to, well, I'll rewind a little bit. So back in the day, there were commercial uses that also had residential portions. Basically, it was split zoning. And there was a big zoning code rewrite in 2014, most of you know about. And so this basically fixes it's about 24 properties that were left that are still grandfathered into the old system, because currently the way it works is they have to do both site plan review and conditional use. So this is going to let them do just the site plan review. So you get to do the whole thing at once. The big thing is there are two proposed amendments to the ZTA. The first is basically, if you look at the ZTA, we're going to move one section down a line. And so this would mean that a sketch plan, it will apply whether or not a sketch plan is required. And then the second amendment is to change the word parking setback to parking layout, and this will allow a more holistic review and is honestly just a more accurate phrase of what's happening, because site plan looks at things like landscaping, which are not technically included in the word setback. So yeah, that's the, I don't know, what do you think, Councilman? That was a 2-minute overview.
Home run. Home run. Well done.
That was excellent.
I'm turning you to Chairman Anderson. Less is more.
Yeah, well, I agree with all that. I just deeply resent anything that I was associated with as being called back in the day. You really know how to make me feel old. But other than that, that's great. Congratulations to Councilmember Hucker for introducing a measure for administrative economy, as the staff report says, and not bureaucratic mazes.
Yes, that's in New Montgomery County.
My only gripe with the packet was that the ZTA is co-led by Mr. Hucker and myself, and the packet didn't mention that, but
duly noted. Yes.
Okay, I appreciate Mr. Hucker's
No, I appreciate the chairman's support.
Mr. Friedson.
In the interest of trying to get a little credit for things that I don't deserve, I'm actually a co-sponsor of the zoning text amendment.
Yes.
But yeah, just very briefly, I mean, this is a common sense proposal. It is part of a broader effort that I know we're all working on, executive branch and legislative branch, to try to figure out how to eliminate some of the bureaucratic red tape, to streamline our processes, to show local businesses that we're here to help, that our goal is yes and not no. In this particular case, there's some really key industries that have been impacted, and this is a real significant opportunities. So I just wanted to thank Council President Hucker and Councilmember Reamer. I think it's appropriate that Council President and District Council Member and the Fed Chair put this in. I'm really pleased to support it and look forward to us moving forward. And I think this is one where we get to do something at the County Council, and very quickly I think there will be a benefit to it, which is I think why all of us do local government. So again, this is one example of it doesn't seem like it makes a huge impact, but it will actually have a significant impact, and we'll be able to make a big difference in a relatively short period of time.
Yep, we have a life sciences company in an urbanized area that wants to move very quickly on some very exciting new opportunities, and this would essentially, passing this will help support their desired timeline. Great. Well, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I?
Yeah.
I'm not on video. I'm here, but
Okay.
I'll be on video shortly once just having some bandwidth. But I agree with everything that's been said. It's I won't take any credit for it, but I will vote for it, and I think it's great that we're moving it forward. So thank you. Congratulations to the sponsor.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Well, you'll get credit when you vote for it. All right. So we have amendments that we need to move. I'll ask one of my colleagues to move the amendments, or how about we'll take them without objection?
Yes, sure.
Yep.
And with that, we have an amended ZTA before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right.
Aye.
We have a unanimous committee vote.
Terrific.
Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you all so much. Good luck with your next item.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome to stay.
Savor the irony while Councilmember Jawando needs some wireless connectivity or network connectivity to join us by video.
I'll be there shortly.
Good. All right, let's move on to the next item. Thank you. So we are now taking up the wireless infrastructure amendment that is needed in order to allow for the continued expansion of our wireless networks, which are hitting capacity. And it's hard to even understate how much of our lives now are intertwined with our devices. It's just ubiquitous in our days, and I know there's some people who long for a different time without digital connectivity and everything that modernity brings. But I think most of us accept that this is the future and it's the world we live in, and we want to keep it moving forward. So we need to make changes in order to allow this infrastructure. And since our last conversation, staff has done some very helpful work. I want to thank Livu and Ju, who joined us and immediately has taken up one of the more challenging issues that this body has wrestled with in over many years. So we asked staff to come back to us now in light of the legal decisions that have been handed down and provide us with a zoning framework that we know would conform to what we expect is the legal context, and also, in my view, certainly conforms to the future and conforms to what we want, which is to be able to have the continued expansion and deployment of our wireless networks, which are essential for our success. So staff has presented a number of recommendations, and we can work through those. We're joined by many people who have relevant functions here, and I think we can sort of introduce people as we arrive, to needing to consult. But thank you to everyone for your work and your collaboration on this. And I see we're joined by Debbie Spielberg from the County Executive's office. So I will now turn it to Livu and ask you to please, let us know who's here, and then proceed in with your excellent packet, which I really appreciate. Thank you.
Sure. So with us, we have Asan Mozzetti, who's the Deputy Director of DPS. We also have Linda Kobleski, who's the Chief of Land Development for DPS. We have Ben Berber, I believe also Casey Anderson from the Planning Department, Dan Snee from the Department of Transportation, Mitzi Herrera from the Office of Broadband Programs, and then Debbie Spielberg from the County Executive's Office, if we have any questions related to all of their various agencies. So at the last work session, we covered quite a bit. So we reviewed the standards of other jurisdictions. We looked at some maps of where towers currently are and how the CTA would expand that number, and how different provisions and edits would expand that number in different ways. We got an update from the county executive on the franchise and license agreements that apply to the commercial areas. We talked about some of the technical aspects of where towers can be placed and how. And then we heard some alternative methods for shortening the conditional use process from OZA, which specifically the waiver and objection process. So today the staff report focuses on mostly the things that we didn't fully cover or decide last time. So I'm going to start with limited use. So limited use standards, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to pause you just to share a process note. For my colleagues, I'm going to be looking at the packets on screen, so it may be hard for me to see if you wave your hand. So please text me if you would like to speak. When it's clear that we're in dialogue and I'm looking at the screen, we all know we're looking at the screens, the hand waving will be fine. So for the moment, please use texting. If any of my colleagues wanted to make any prefatory comment, that'd be fine. Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt you. Please continue.
Absolutely. So starting with limited use. So limited use standards are completely objective criteria. They don't have a public hearing. And so usually that's used for things where there isn't really a debate. Like, here are the rules. If you meet them, you get that use. For building permits, there is a bit of an appeal process, but that's usually about DPS's approval or denial rather than making just a general objection to them approving something. So basically, to appeal that, there would have to be a violation of the actual code standards, which in this case would be things like setbacks and height. So right now, the ZTA does have various standards and ways to satisfy that limited use. And then if a pole does not meet those limited use standards, then as a CTA is currently written, it goes to a shortened conditional use process. So to start, I'm going to go through each of those various limited use issues. So the first is the setback. So under the ZTA, the replacement pole has to be at least 60 feet from any building that's intended for human occupation. And this excludes the setback encroachments that are allowed as the limited use. So currently, if these numbers help, so there's about 9,000 poles that have less than a 30-foot setback, about 18,000 poles that have a setback between 30 and 45 feet, and then 14,000 poles that have a setback between 45 and 60 feet, and then 33,000 poles with a setback of 60 feet or more. And those reasons those numbers are in there so you can see, based on what you decide that setback should be, how many more poles Montgomery County is going to get. So based on those numbers, the council staff recommendation is to limit that use distance to 30 feet. Currently it's at 60 feet, which is that about 13,000 poles that currently, the 33,000 that have that setback. This recommendation was based on looking at the provisions in other jurisdictions. So what we did for this packet, because we know that now everyone is printing at home, rather than attaching all the prior staff reports, there is a link at the bottom of your staff report. So if you go to that old one, you can pull up the chart that compares the different jurisdictions if you want to look at that from last time. So based on other jurisdictions, theirs tend to be closer to that 30 feet than the 60 feet, which would allow more poles generally. And then based on the maps and GIS analysis that we've seen, this would bring us closer to the number of poles that the ZTA intended to increase to.
Thank you.
So I'll pause there because I assume there's questions about that piece.
Great. Well, this is the first big element here. So our goal should be to allow a smooth, efficient process for antennas to be put on poles so that the companies can actually build the networks that we need. And the question is, how far from a building, can a pole be before a more intensive process is required? And your staff recommendation is that as long as it's further than 30 feet, so 30.1, is that right? So as long as it's further than 30 feet, it would be a limited use. And then if it implying or obviously requiring that if it's closer than 30 feet, it would be a different standard. So what that would do is to incentivize the companies to use poles that are a bit further away rather than, quickly using the poles that are the closest. And that might provide some comfort to people. I'm not sure it really matters. I mean, DC and Virginia allow 10 feet or anything in the right of way. But I think this certainly seems sufficient. And I appreciate your recommendation. I think it's a huge improvement over the draft ZTA, which was 60 feet. So it would go to 30 feet would be the limited use, and that would open up enough poles around the county that we would actually get a network deployment. There's been some comments made about, well, this has been already allowed in the urbanized areas. It might be true, but it doesn't really do you any good to have 5G coverage in a small patch of town, and then not have it elsewhere. Or like that's not how the networks work. Networks have broad coverage, and the technology wants to be everywhere, or else really the companies won't bother to build it. So it's important for us to have it broadly out here. So I will go to my colleagues first for any comments they would like to make on this particular provision. Okay. Not seeing any, then I'll say without objection. Okay, thank you. We'll continue to the next item.
So the next issue that's been raised is what happens with new poles. So the way the ZTA is currently written, it refers to pre-existing poles and it refers to replacement poles. So the issue here is that a replacement pole is not a new pole. It's one you took down and then you put up a new one. So wholly new is in there is no pole there. There's a question of what should happen to those. And so the recommendation from staff is basically to treat those similar to what we're doing with the pre-existing and the replacement poles. So that would mean and we'll get into the different waiver and conditional use processes later, but basically that new poles could just be subjected to those same limited use standards. I know this hasn't been discussed a bunch yet because there was a question about what a new pole is. So basically, if they meet the setback and the height requirements of the limited use provisions that already exist, then you could put that new pole there. And if they don't, they'd have to go through whatever alternative process the council decides on.
Okay. I was still absorbing our previous, success. So I'll ask you to just restate that again, just for, I know it's there, but I didn't hear how you described it. I want to make sure it's clear for everybody else. So if you could just say it again, please, Sam.
Sure, absolutely. So the current ZTA, I can actually just read the language. So the current ZTA says where a telecommunications tower is allowed as a limited use and the tower would replace a pre-existing utility pole, streetlight pole, or site plan approved parking lot pole. So if you read that language, it doesn't say a new pole. So there isn't a provision in there for what happens to a brand new pole, which would imply that new poles are not currently included in those limited use standards the way the ZTA is currently written. And so the staff recommendation is, I should also say, so that would mean the way the ZTA is currently written, a brand new pole would not meet the limited use standards and therefore would have to go through the conditional use process, regardless of whether it meets the setback and height requirements that the replacement poles in the limited use process have already met.
Right. Okay, comments, Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, thanks. So, well, first of all, I think the prior decision that we made, that the hope is Chair kind of noted, there's more poles now available, so hopefully that limits the need for new poles, which I think everybody would prefer existing poles to be used to the greatest extent possible. That's the least intrusive. In terms of the Ninth Circuit, I've talked a lot, and I appreciate, because the packet is really focused on, what are regional counterparts doing? What are our limitations under the Ninth Circuit ruling? Because we can only do what we can do here. So, in terms of what our requirements are, in terms of not, preventing deployment, what would the way that new poles would be viewed? I mean, if a new pole is required in order to have adequate coverage, is there a thought of at what point we could be in a challenging environment from the Ninth Circuit standard?
So the way it's currently written, if under the ZTA, the conditional use process is fine under the Ninth Circuit standard, which it should be with the different changes that have been made in terms of shortening it, then the new poles, it wouldn't bump up against that. Basically, the Ninth Circuit decision, the main thing it said, and this is kind of vague because it hasn't fully been tested yet, is that we can't materially inhibit the development of a pole. So since a new pole would still go through some sort of process to get approved and developed and put up, we wouldn't be bumping against that, is the argument. So if you did decide to leave it the way that it is and have new poles have to go through that process, that shouldn't be an issue with the Ninth Circuit, unless the whole ZTA was going to be an issue with the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple questions within this. It's not just a question of conditional use versus this waiver and objection process, but there's also a question, at least that I have, on the difference between 30 feet, within 30 feet, beyond 30 feet. Is it for all new poles? Is it for new poles that are under this ZTA and the limited use standard? Is that a decision point that we need to make here?
So basically the issue with the new poles is the ZTA is, I shouldn't say silent on it, but a new pole, even if it met that setback you decided on for replacement poles, would still have to go through that other process, because the way the provision reads, it says a limited use is replacing a pre-existing pole.
Yeah, I'll turn to Councilmember Joanna if you want, and then I'll probably circle back in the queue if that's okay.
Thanks. So, I think it's important in light of everything that's going on. Obviously, the previous decision. Obviously, there's a new administration. There's a case, the lawsuit right now, right, that we're not a party to, but if successful, we could have to revisit everything. Right, depending on which way that goes. I would be comfortable. I think the suggestions that I want to ask a question, but I'm leaning towards the suggestions that you made in the packet, Lifu, of trying to modify the conditional use process, and you lay out a couple of ways that could happen. I think would be ideal in my mind. And still keep the what is important, public input in the process, but also make sure that we're moving it along with the intent that it's allowed, and it's just going to be a matter of when and where. I don't think, I'm not as concerned, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, that that the Biden administration is going to be coming after local jurisdictions that make a decision on day 92 or something. But that being said, we don't want to assume that. So could you just maybe talk through, for the benefit of people who have, just quickly, the suggestions you made of if we wanted to modify? I know they're in the packet, but just do what you did at the beginning and summarize them briefly for folks.
Absolutely. So the conditional use, so basically it started with the conditional use process is just too long. it would not meet the shot clock under the FCC. So all the modifications are to shorten, or most of the modifications are to shorten that process. And it basically does this in 5 different ways. So the first is notice. Notice would be provided to everybody within 300 feet. Usually, I believe the utility poles, it's within half a mile, but you're not going to see a 50-foot pole from half a mile away. So it limits notice to 300 feet for if there's an application that has to go through the conditional use process. I believe OZA is supposed to send a letter to everybody, and there'll be a sign posted at the site where the pole is going to be. The second thing is eliminating planning board and planning staff's review and recommendation. It's not saying it could never happen. It could be requested if the hearing examiner wants their input, they could still request it, but it's not going to be mandatory, which would also shorten the process a bit. The third thing is the findings are limited, also to comply with the FCC rules, so that, because we can't have the hearing examiner say, you're right, no pole here, because that would be materially inhibiting the development of a pole. So instead, the hearing examiner's findings are going to be limited to, okay, you wanted the pole here, what if instead we put it over here? And so it will actually still be pretty fast, because at the time there's an application for a new pole, there's going to have to be, you have to submit like 3 alternative sites. So we'll already have all that information in front of us. The fourth compromise would be that instead of going to the Board of Appeals after the hearing examiner's decision, they go straight to the Ninth Circuit. So at that point, like Montgomery County has made its decision, approved or disapproved, and then it goes, if somebody disagrees with that, they don't also have to go to the Board of Appeals, because that would add several months. And then the last thing is that hearings would be consolidated. So if you have several polls in the same location that are all going to look about the same, be in the same neighborhood, have similar design, and you applied for all of them within 30 days, we can hear all of those at once rather than bringing everybody in multiple times for each new antenna.
Yep. Thank you. That was elegantly done. And I think it's reasonable, provide some, no one's going to be 100% happy, but would provide some due process to folks in the neighborhood in a reasonable way, but also allow us that chance to meet the shot clock. So I would, want to hear what my colleagues think, but I think that probably would be the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll say I am very supportive of the waiver and objection process. I think we want to move to the, something where there is a specific right, at the same time, not one that we think can certainly conform to the federal mandate, but also work, get done, and not have us needlessly spending money on hearings that ultimately just have to be approved. I think that's one of the core issues here. But so I wanted to really go along with the idea of the waiver and objection process. Let's hear what Councilmember Friedson wants to say.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think I'm leaning towards the waiver and objection process too. I think, I do think we should keep it at 300 feet as envisioned. I know there was interest in shrinking that even further. I think going from a half mile to 300 feet is already significant. And so if we are going to go with the waiver and objection process, then I do think that it should stay at 300 feet. At least that's where my perspective is. I do think that gives community members an opportunity to object, but doesn't hold up the process. And I think that is a reasonable compromise there. And I think that it would be helpful either here or at a later on in the packet if we talk through what the standards would be, like what would the basis of the objection would be. I know we get into that a little bit more later in the packet, so we don't have to do that here. But I think that's important for folks to understand. So I think that we ought to do that. But to me, not mandating a conditional use process, which is already somewhat questionable whether it raises shot clock issues under the Ninth Circuit, and providing reasonable opportunity for residents to object on the basis of this pole versus that pole, this location versus that location, not to prevent deployment, which we're not allowed to do, but to ensure that deployment is being done with community input. So I think I'd be in that camp as well.
Okay, so we're to
Yeah,
sum
sorry.
up.
One more question. I said this in the beginning. So this would be for all new polls, a waiver and objection process. Could new polls be deployed within 30 feet?
So if the ZTA changed from a conditional use to a waiver and objection process, but everything else remained the same, then all new polls, the applicant would have to apply for a waiver because they're not using a pre-existing poll. So they'd still have to apply for a waiver.
Okay, for all new polls. I think
Yes.
okay. I just wanted to clarify that. You're on mute.
It's not 30 feet. It's not that if you're further than 30 feet and it's a new pole, it's limited use. It's all new poles require the objection and waiver process.
Exactly, and that was my intention. I just wanted to make sure that that's what we were.
Yep.
Agreeing.
Can I just ask, if I don't want to cut you off?
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
The notice requirement, in the packet, it looks like you're saying that this would putting a sign, a building permit application sign posted on the proposed site could be adequate notice, as opposed to the more. What's the distinction? Let me not put words in your mouth. Between the notice, between everyone getting a letter, versus this process. Is there a difference in the notice? I think there is, but I just want to clarify that.
Yes, you are correct. There is a difference. So with the conditional use process, the way it's currently written, everybody would get a letter and there'd be a sign. So the way the waiver and objection process is written as proposed is similar to the way it is for accessory dwelling units. And in those cases, I don't believe everyone gets a letter. It's just the sign posted on the property. So that's how the community would know if there is a thing happening that they object to.
So the 300 feet doesn't come into play at all in the waiver and objection process.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what Councilmember Friedson was saying was that you could only object if you were within 300 feet. Was that the suggestion?
I thought the notice was provided about the poll.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's why it says it's not. I mean, that was one of my main concerns there, is that, unless you're in unless you see the sign, you might not know. So no, I think what Ms. Nadeau was saying is that under the altered conditional use process, there was notice you'd have to get a letter. Under this waiver and objection, they just have to post the sign up.
We can't require that there be notice for the waiver and objection process, that there just be a public notice requirement that you send a letter to people who live within 300 feet.
I believe you could require that. The issue would be, so the way it works in the waiver and objection is someone submits an application and they request a waiver from the setback or the height or because it's a new pole, and then someone in the community can submit an objection. So the whole process isn't even triggered until there is a waiver or objection. So if you wanted to send notice to everybody, then basically you always have to send notice for all the poles under this provision,
Right.
because if they're outside of that limited use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think I just want to make sure it makes sense to me. I think that the notice is critical, because if you're going to have objections, people have to know what's going on. But and now that they're 30 feet, they're going to be, it's a lot, we're going to have to, that's going to matter. The 300 feet, you could only object within if you're within 300 feet. Is that what's currently in here, or is that something that is proposed? That I want to understand your right to object under the waiver.
That is not currently in here, but it could be. Basically, it's creating basically you're saying what's somebody's standing to object.
Yeah.
And the reason would be, you don't want someone across town objecting to this poll. So when there was the notice to the 300 people, the presumption is only the people within 300 feet. It would only be the people within that 300 feet who would be, showing up at a hearing in opposition because they're the ones who got the notice. So if you adopt the waiver and objection process, then there could be an issue of standing in terms of who could actually object that you might want to address. You could leave it alone, and I don't know.
I need to address that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So my understanding was that there would be public notice. Maybe I misunderstood that in the packet, or wasn't. I wasn't clear about that. But I do think that there should be notice, and I do think we should clarify who has standing. I think 300 feet is appropriate. I think 100 feet is too limited. I think half a mile is probably too much, to your point. So if we could include, if we could include the notice, just and this is only, just to be clear, this is only for new poles. So if you are deploying a new pole, you send notice to people within 300 feet, residents within 300 feet of the new pole. Those residents would have the ability to object, and this would provide community input, but an expedited process in order to comply with, shot clock issues. To me, that's appropriate.
And if I know this is new, Mr. Nadeau, just for you, that I am for the conditional use process. So we got a lot of things going on right now. I just would like it noted that I prefer that in the packet. It could be two. But if we do go, assuming I think they counted the votes, if we do go waiver and objection, I would agree that you should have the 300. The notice that was contained within the conditional use process should still happen, and that I'd be fine with the standing of 300 feet as well.
And the notice would be, in addition to for new polls, you'd probably also want that notice for anybody who filed for a waiver, so that those people know that something different than the limited use standards was put into play. That's all. It's all writable.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful for everybody. There's a lot of moving parts here to recap, what the agreement is, and then the only other thing that I wanted to clarify. Currently, with a new pole, are we allowing for a new pole within 30 feet if there's no objection to the pole, or is that prohibited and would have to be conditional use, since conditional use is required inside of 30 feet for existing poles as well?
So since under the conditional use process, if you're under 30 feet and pre-existing, you need to have a hearing, then my assumption would be if you instead do the waiver and objection process, someone who has a new pole and also wants it under 30 feet, yes, would have to have that hearing before the hearing examiner about why.
Okay, so under 30 feet, no matter what, new pole or existing pole would go through the expedited conditional use process. New poles beyond 30 feet would be waiver of an objection.
So it's two separate things. So you could have new poles do waiver and objection, and poles that don't meet limited use do conditional use, or you could just have everything that doesn't meet limited use do waiver and objection and eliminate the conditional use process altogether.
Which is not what you were saying. You were saying within 30 feet. You were saying you could keep
I'm trying to clarify what we're agreeing to here to make sure I understand. I was less telling my opinion to say, I think we need to clarify this specifically before we move on.
I want to repeat what I thought Andrew asked, which is, this proposal allows poles closer than 30 feet, but they must go through the waiver they must go through a process. And so just to establish that, it allows poles at closer distances, but they must go through the process. The process provides standing to those who are, we haven't decided what the process is in a blanket way, but I think Andrew asked a threshold question, is it allowed closer than 30? And the answer is yes, but through process. And secondly, all new poles go through process. That's what I'm understanding here. All new poles go through process, regardless of distance.
Right. And I do think it'd be appropriate distinction to have a conditional for the ones that are closer than 30 feet, to have a more rigorous review I know
Why don't we talk about this concept, because we're already sort of halfway into it, about waiver and objection, conditional use. Can you just explain to us conceptually what, we had talked about a streamlined conditional use process. I'm not sure how successful. I think we were sort of successful in streamlining it, but I think it's still an open question, which is the problem. It's still an open question as to meeting shot clock and all these other things. And I think what you have done is present an alternative, the waiver and objection, which you feel confident would meet the shot clock requirements. So can you describe these? Can you describe that for us? Describe them both for us.
So the conditional use process is so it was those 5 points where we found a way to shorten that whole process. So the waiver and objection process, the way it would work is, so under a conditional use, everything that doesn't meet limited use standards has to go through that process. With the waiver and objection, you wouldn't have to go through the unless there was actually a waiver requested or an objection raised. So it reduces the number of public hearings, but it doesn't actually change the fact that the community could always object and get a hearing. It's just if there's a proposed pole, a proposed antenna, and there's no waiver requested, there's no objection, the community's fine with it, there basically saves time because there's no reason to go through that hearing and even risk the shot clock.
That's really helpful. So that's the primary distinction. It is whether every application will go or whether they will only go when there is an objection or a waiver has been applied for.
It's basically an opt-in versus an opt-out. So I think anything within 30 feet should be the expedited conditional use. New poles beyond 30 feet should be waiver and objection, and existing poles beyond 30 feet should be limited use. That is my preference.
So in other words,
I yield to colleagues, but
in other words, just to restate what you've proposed, anything closer than 30 feet is conditional use, expedited conditional use, I presume.
Yes, the conditional use as described. Yes, yeah.
We would have to decide what that means.
That's a later conversation. Yes, but yeah.
And then
conditional use that complies with the Ninth Circuit.
And then new poles are waiver and object, is what you said. And then greater than 30 is limited use.
For existing, yeah.
And I would, just to follow the same, so you know where we are. I want to, under 30, I agree with the conditional use as described in the packet. I'd like that to be the process throughout, and then obviously existing poles, are limited use. I'm fine with that.
Sausage making. Okay. I can agree with Councilmember Friesen's proposal there. So, all right. I think that's 2-1, although I'm not sure exactly what language. I think it's very clear what we just voted 2-1 in favor of. You can continue through the packet. Okay.
We'll have to, and I just want to make sure, and we include the notice requirements in standing at 300 feet, just to make sure that was part of that.
And I think that applies. Councilmember Juando supported that under either conditional use or waiver and objection. And again, just to restate the difference here, it's that anything under 30 feet will go through additional process regardless. Whereas if we did not do it this way and it was purely waiver and object, then there could be installations that are closer than 30 feet that nobody objected to and they just happened. Okay.
Yeah, the concern would be that you could have a new pole within 30 feet that would go through a less rigorous standard. So this would avoid that. Anything within 30 feet would go through the same standard, whether it's a new or an existing pole.
Okay.
Maybe I think Mitzi and
Pam here. Yeah, Pam and then Mitzi.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that if you have an existing pole then that's less than 30 feet, you're still requiring conditional use rather than the waiver objection process for an existing pole below 30 feet. Just want to clarify it.
That is what we said, yeah.
Say that again, Pam.
So we have the fact that this, if you have an existing pole, so it's already there, maybe it's at 29 feet or 28 feet, it doesn't get the objection waiver process. It also has the expedited conditional use process by simply the fact that it's
within 30 feet.
but it's less than 30 feet.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll say I'm willing to support that. It is similar to what I proposed previously in the ZTA. It is not, depending on how streamlined we make the conditional use process, it is not as streamlined as other jurisdictions, but it might be a reasonable compromise for us. Okay.
So I have a couple questions about this. So right now, if you want to attach to an existing structure, which is usually an existing utility pole, the pole has to be 30 feet back. But now we're saying if you want to come in and replace a street light, the street light only has to be 30 feet back to get the limited use. So we're reducing, whereas now we have a 60-foot requirement to use existing structures, we're going to make it so that if you come in and you replace a pole or a street light, you can have it as close as 30 feet.
Well, limited use is applying to utility poles or streetlights, right?
Yeah, but Debbie?
Debbie wants to.
Yeah, so the existing statute is 60 feet if you're attaching to an existing structure. So did
Can you just say, when we talk about existing statute, please, when we say existing statute, do you mean existing law or the?
I mean the zoning ordinance.
Proposal.
59.3.
No, I mean under the current law, 1802.
Yeah.
As the law exists now,
Well,
if you want to come in and attach on an existing structure, the existing structure has to be 60 feet back. And
right, and that was not 1802. That was previously.
That was previous. That was under Nancy Farina. She had actually advocated for that.
It's 2014, and it was, I can't remember what CTA number, but under existing zoning ordinance. If you have an existing structure, which is usually, as Mitzi is saying, a utility pole, because our streetlight poles generally have to be replaced. They can't bear the weight of it. And Linda or Asan can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But so current practice and what is allowed under existing zoning is you can attach to existing utility poles in these non-CR areas at 60 feet. That's currently allowed. And as I understand it, did you guys just agree to reduce that to 30 feet or am I?
No. It didn't change the existing structure. What it changed is the replacement.
Replacement, right. So,
right. So, but I just want to point out, what we're saying is if the utility pole now is closer than 60 feet, you cannot get a limited use. But now we're going to say, but if you want to change out that utility pole or street light, you can get as close as 30 feet.
Okay, wait, pause.
No, item one, we voted on.
Say that again?
Yeah, we voted unanimously on item one in the packet, which related to the staff recommendation on 30 feet limited use.
Yeah, 30 feet is.
So I think we're missing the item one, and we're talking about the next item that we've been talking about, which is new structures and how that relates to the existing structures. But we did vote 3-0.
That would cover attachments. That would cover attachments to existing poles. That's what we have already.
Just to make sure, I mean, that's what I voted on. So, and I think that's what we all voted on. So I just want to make sure that executive staff understood what was happening.
Well, so I just wanted to, so I'm not sure I do understand, but just to clarify. So point number one is the vast majority of what will be happening going forward. So that's both replacement poles as opposed to these new poles. And then my understanding is the definition of a new pole is where there's no pole currently. So no street light and no utility pole. That is a much more of a rare occurrence. I think Ms. Nadu was proposing that just because she's trying to say there has to be some sort of process. But my understanding is that the vast majority of applications will concern either existing or replacement poles.
Yes.
Okay, so
Well,
But
no, Mitzi, let me pause. We have, I believe, and I'm going to ask Lou to confirm, we have already agreed that whether it is an attachment to an existing pole or a replacement pole, it's 30 feet limited use.
That is correct in terms of what you just voted on.
Okay, but that's not what the language proposed is. I mean, the language in the packet doesn't say that.
Okay.
Because just so we're clear,
that's helpful.
the replacement structures are in a different section, section 2, versus section 14 for existing structures. They're in different sections of the code.
Okay, so let us, thank you. Let's not, I think the committee has made it clear what our intent is. And so we'll ask staff, subsequently to review very carefully and ensure that the draft CTA reflects what our intent is. Is there, okay? Okay. Very good.
Okay, so presuming what you voted on is to now say that whether it's on an existing structure or a replacement structure, it is limited use if it is at least 30 feet.
Correct.
Okay, but now those ones have a height limit. So the replacement structure is a certain height above the existing structure. And the existing structure is not changed. But now what you're considering is that you could have the waiver and objection process to get something up to 50 feet with no height limits below 50 feet.
Well, I don't think that's.
We haven't gotten there yet, have we?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to heights yet. That's next.
Okay, so part of, I think what we want to do is we want to encourage use of existing structures or replacement structures because we're not adding new poles. And in fact, they're the most sought after places because power already exists at those locations.
Yeah, I think we agree there.
But what are you saying, Mitzi? Like, what's your point with?
I feel like what we're doing is we're incentivizing going for a new structure because you can use the waiver process and it eliminates the height restriction.
Well, it doesn't have to eliminate the height restriction. I think we can have a set a standard that isn't more liberal for new structure with respect to height. I think we can address that when we get there. I mean, I think you raise a really important point. As I was saying before, the goal here should be that existing structures should be as available so that they are encouraged to be used because it's better to use an existing structure than a new structure. That is best for everybody involved. That is best for deployment. That is best for residents. That we'd rather use existing than have new. So when we get to the height for new structures, I think that we should make sure that we're not providing more liberal standards for new structures as we have for existing structures based on height and any other restriction. Are there other concerns that you would have related to?
Yeah, I think that the other concern is in the types of streets that can be used. You'd want to you want to take a look at not just did I look at everything else on the block and is this the best one on the block? But if I looked within the neighborhood or the area that I'm going, did I try to put it on the largest street? Is there a way for me to deploy it on the large street outside the subdivision rather than inside the subdivision? And that ought to be something that you're required to show, or that there's another way that the county has sort of tiered or incentivized it so that potentially either the waiver process might apply only if you're on the larger streets and you have to go to conditional use if you're on the smaller streets, so that you're doing as much as possible to drive providers to design their systems so that they're least intrusive in the neighborhoods but still allow them to provide service.
Yeah, so I was talking about this before. There are a number of issues that we need to take up, that some of which are discussed later on in the packet. I mean, I will be honest, we were told that the executive branch was going to be providing us with a number of standards and thoughts related specifically to these issues. I have yet to see anything in writing from the executive branch on any of this. But that said, I mentioned that we need to address all of the issues that you just discussed. That I think that they're important. We need to take them up. I thought they were later in the packet. I mentioned that. I still think that. I think that you've raised an important point that we want, to the greatest extent possible, incentivize, or at least not create a perverse disincentive related to existing structures versus new structures when possible. I think for everybody involved, including those that are deploying the technology, existing structure is preferable for all the reasons that you've stated. But I think that those standards, including the standards with which an objection could be raised objectively, we need to address. But I don't think that, I think that those are separate but related points that we need to decide on.
Yeah. First of all, we are going to design an objection process that allows people to say that there's a less intrusive location. Secondly, I think there's a little bit of a mythology there that you can get by installing antennas on arterials and not have them in interior roads. Like, that's not going to be satisfactory for the future networks that we're trying to build. So I know that has been requested, but that is going to be unlikely to work. And secondly, using existing structures is already incentivized just based on cost. That was mentioned. But, arterial road towers or poles are higher. They probably already have more room, and they're going to be the cheapest place to install on. So that market, existing cost incentives are already built in to use arterials first and higher poles first, because you don't have to go through all that expense and all that work.
Other than the regulatory process that we're looking at, the cost to replace a smaller street pole and a taller street pole are arguably the same. The cost to replace a wooden utility pole is the same. So whether it's on an interior or an exterior street, it's the additional regulatory steps that we may place that would be the difference.
Well, Mitzi, we've been doing this for 5 years. What are you talking about? What proposal do you think we should enact?
Well, I don't think in any circumstances that I don't think we've ever in those 5 years discussed allowing things closer than 30 feet under any circumstances or any conditional use process. And looking at the maps that we had, I mean, given the number of poles and things that are out there, I don't necessarily know why we need to consider that.
Consider what?
Why we need to create a conditional use process that allows us to use poles closer than 30 feet in residential areas.
Because there are places where that will be necessary in order to have networks. I mean, I think the committee's already voted on that. So, we have that established.
Well, I don't think we had the discussion about that in particular. We said you could go to 30 feet. The within 30 feet, we didn't talk about explicitly at all. That wasn't brought up until we got to later part of the discussion of what would the process be within 30 feet. So I think,
well,
just to be fair.
I think we've said we want to allow that. Actually, we just said we want to allow it by conditional use.
Just to clarify, it was stated earlier that anything that is not expressly mentioned here is the standard conditional use process. And if we need a different conditional use process, in order to meet the shot clock, we have to establish the different conditional use standard. The purpose of the ZTA was to create limited use to avoid conditional use. So, within 30 feet, my understanding is whether it's a new pole or an existing pole, it would go through the conditional use process because
currently, right,
being carved out to allow for limited use. If that is not the case, then we can
Wait a
discuss that. But I'm not. If I could finish, that would be appreciated. If what you're saying is there's currently a prohibition against new poles within 30 feet in the zoning text, in the current zoning code, which I'm not aware of, that might be the case, then perhaps we can discuss whether or not it's relevant. But unless there's an express prohibition against a new pole going within 30 feet.
Yeah, let's answer that. Can we get the answer to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an express prohibition against a new pole?
Okay, so the current requirement would be that you have to have a and Lulu, can you remind me, in the residential areas, is it only limited use now, or is it limited and conditional?
Currently, I believe it's only limited, but I will double check.
Okay. Under current law, in order to get a conditional use in a residential area, it would have to be 300 feet back. So there's no express prohibition of putting a new pole in, but you could only put it in if it was 300 feet back from a structure. So there's not many places that meet that criteria. And I'm trying to pull up the
Again, you asked the core question, why would we allow poles ever or attachments ever within 30 feet? And the answer is because we have to.
Well, sorry for interrupting, but the issue is we cannot prohibit service.
Yeah.
And based on the maps that we have of where these poles are, I don't think that if you moved the attachments to existing structure and the replacement structure limit down to 30 feet, I don't believe that a provider could come in and say, there's absolutely no pole that I could use that's 30 feet back and provide service.
Well, I think you're doing a fine job advocating the executive branch's position, which is to make it as restrictive as possible, to make it as difficult and unlikely as possible that we will get a quality rollout of wireless infrastructure.
That is not the position of the administration.
Oh, that's the effect. That's the effect. And so, I think the point is, if you look at other jurisdictions as an example, you'll see that absolutely they allow installations closer than 30 feet. Definitely they do.
And we do in CR areas.
What's that?
I mean, but respectfully, if we're saying that in commercial areas, you can install as limited use up to 10 feet, and in residential areas, you can install up to 30 feet, I do not believe that we are prohibiting service. I don't believe that in some of these areas, they need to get closer than that.
Understood. But I don't think that's the appropriate standard, is are we prohibiting service? I think the standard is, are we going to get a really high quality network? Those are actually two different. One is what is the least permissive we can be, and one is what is, generally permissive to get a good deployment.
Right.
So let me ask, I just want to ask Livu if she could just kind of restate what the committee has voted on, and let's find out if that's where people are.
Okay, so far, the first vote was 3-0 that the limited use standard is being reduced from 60 feet to 30 feet. And then the second decision was that if you want a pole that's under 30 feet, you have to go through the conditional use process. And then also that new poles should go through the waiver objection process. I think the question Mitzi is asking is, for a new pole that is also under 30 feet, should they also go through the conditional use process?
It is going through. I mean, we agreed for it to go through the conditional use process. What I think Mitzi is saying is that it should be prohibited expressly, that there should never be a new pole.
That there's no need for
permitted.
That is what I'm saying. Is I don't believe that there's a need for conditional use for less than that, and I don't believe that the executive agrees that it has to be as close as 30 feet. But that said, I don't believe that there needs to be a conditional use process to get below that. I am concerned that the waiver process allows a much taller height than for a new pole.
Well, let's put that aside because I think we're
We
like
haven't gotten to
going
that.
around to a lot of different issues
All
that's
right.
hard to follow, and we don't have anything in writing and have not received anything in writing from the executive branch. So I got to be honest, it's very difficult to understand the executive branch's position, on these various issues, not withstanding the prior conversation we had and the understanding that we were going to receive something specific. But okay, go ahead.
Yeah, could I just understand, under 30 feet now, is it allowed or not allowed currently? Through a conditional use process or any other process?
I think it would be difficult.
You could go through the process, conditional use, theoretically.
You could, but if you look at the specific conditions on which the conditional use is allowed, I think it would be difficult.
Got it. Okay.
So it's not expressly prohibited
Right.
under the current law. We're not expressly prohibiting it under this change, and we're going to set standards later on in this packet, which could provide similarly appropriate levels of restriction within what we're allowed to do under the Ninth Circuit. So I'm just a little bit confused. It feels like a moving target, to be perfectly honest with you. That we're allowing something that was previously prohibited. Can we legally, would we have the authority? I don't know if you could help us here. Legally, would we have the authority to say a new structure within 30 feet is not allowed under any circumstance? At any point?
So long as it doesn't have the effect of prohibiting service.
I appreciate that. I'd like to ask the council attorney, our council staff, the question.
So the answer is it would depend on whether the standard in the Ninth Circuit ruling was materially inhibits. So the provider would, of course, argue if I can't have it within 30 feet, then you are materially inhibiting service. And what Mitzi is arguing is that that's not true. You can still provide service outside of that 30 feet.
Well, what I'm arguing is it is a factual, technical matter as to whether you could provide service. And for the conversations with the providers, whether you use this pole or the next pole, they can usually provide service.
It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of degree, I think, of like how fast and where, and depending on where. My view, just so I'm clear, because there's a lot going on, I think there should be a more rigorous process, as you can apply now, even if it's unlikely, for conditional use under 30 feet. And it should be rigorous, and we shouldn't incentivize that. And that's where we get into the height and stuff later. But that we should have that conditional use process. Now, where I'm unclear with my colleagues is whether it's the streamlined version that we agreed to for the waiver and objection, or are you saying the normal conditional use process? That's I think for colleagues. But what's your understanding?
We haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will say everything would likely have to be the shortened, streamlined conditional use because of the shot clock. Our current regular conditional use standard does not meet the shot clock. So my
understanding is there's three standards here that we're considering, right? We have to throw out our existing conditional use process because it doesn't follow the Ninth Circuit standards. So that is out. That is not an option for us. That is the understanding that we are taking into this conversation. There is then a question of an expedited, as council staff has developed and for our consideration, an expedited version of a conditional use process, which tries to streamline it in a way that our staff believes will comply with the Ninth Circuit standards. Not exactly what our normal conditional use process is, but call it speedy conditional use, or whatever, compliant conditional use, whatever that is. Then there's limited use, which we voted on earlier, of what would be allowed, existing structures beyond 30 feet. And then there's this waiver and objection, process. My understanding, we still have to figure out what it is when it comes to this expedited conditional use, and I think that's a committee discussion. Council staff has provided, what that might look like and explained it earlier. But the conditional use compliant with the Ninth Circuit is the conditional use
Yeah.
Inside 30 feet would apply to, at least was my understanding as we were discussing that. So I just want to make sure that's my understanding.
Sure.
I'll hear from
Sure.
colleagues if that's your
That makes sense. That makes sense.
I like that phrase, compliant conditional use. That expresses our intent here. You know, sure.
Ms. Spielberg, go ahead. You were trying to say something.
I just wanted to clarify my understanding in the, and maybe Pam Dunn or Ms. Nudo can clarify. The main issue is that in the area, mostly residential and other areas, there's only a conditional use process, and that there's for these replacement and new poles. And so that the attempt was to provide some limited use process, but it doesn't preclude a conditional use process in even a standard conditional use process. The FCC rulings do not necessarily preclude a standard conditional use process for certain conditional use, certain conditional uses, if you're generally not effectively prohibiting the service. And so,
right. There's a question of what, as I said at the beginning, like is the FCC or the buyer, you know, how are we going to be? What does that mean? When you say effectively prohibiting services, there has to be arguments made, and there's case law, and people will determine what that means. But for the purposes of the committee, I think there's at least agreement that there should be a more rigorous process if there's an application. I think.
We just lost you there. Or I did anyway. Could you just
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. If you could just say.
I said for under 30 feet, I think we all agree there should be a more rigorous process.
Yeah, we have said we want compliant conditional use for closer than 30 feet, regardless of new pole or replacement pole.
Right.
And then we want limited use beyond 30 feet, and a new pole, regardless. And a new pole further than 30 feet would be waiver and object. That's what, at least, that's
yeah,
what
I disagreed on that.
You disagreed with
part.
that third point.
Yeah.
But I think we may have, I think maybe the first 2 points we generally agree with, although we haven't yet firmed up what is in compliant conditional use.
Right. That sounds right. So, and just to speak on that, I'm fine with the list that staff has. But you guys can, we can talk about it.
But. Okay. So again, closer than 30 feet, compliant conditional use, whether it is new pole or attachment or replacement, doesn't matter. If it's closer than 30 feet, it is compliant conditional use, right, Lulu?
That is correct.
Further than 30 feet, if it is attachment or replacement, it is limited use. Further than 30 feet, if it is a new pole, it is waiver and object. That's what the committee majority is honing in on, and we will get into more further, elements of this as we go. And okay, let's continue. We're on heights.
Can I?
No. I mean, Mitzi, so far you have just expressed opposition to what we have said.
No. I just wanted to clarify on the current law that Councilmember Jawando had asked about, and about what we prohibit now for conditional use. The conditional use is what is required in residential zones. There was no limited use. You had to go through the conditional use process.
Presently.
And the code right now states.
Okay, wait. You're just going to confuse us with talking. Unless someone specifically, if Councilmember Jawando wants to say this question, but please.
Yeah, I mean, if you can finish what the code. I'd like to hear the end of the sentence, and then we can move on. Go ahead.
Okay. So what it states is that in the residential detached zones, the conditional use is allowed if it is a distance of 1 foot for every foot of height, or 300 feet from an existing dwelling, whichever provides the greater setback. So effectively, in order to get a conditional use now, you have to be at least 300 feet back in a residential area.
Got it. And
Current
this
law.
changes this completely. So I get that. That's not relevant to.
Not relevant. We all know we are trying to change the current law from its 300 feet distance.
Right, but you've already voted to say now you can get it at least 30 feet. But now you're also saying as a conditional feet, you can go less than 30 feet. And
Right.
the current one you have now is 300.
Yes, that's what I just said. Okay.
And I'd love to see in writing, as we head to full council, that is currently what's happening. But if you have objections, the county executive has objection, to Councilmember Friesen's point, you should provide that in a detailed form when we get to full council so that we can consider it.
And it would be more standard to have it for the committee sessions, the last committee session, this committee session. I mean, it's very hard to take into serious consideration the county executive's positions if we don't have them in writing, and when we reach out to request them, we receive nothing in response.
We're
Okay,
happy to try to provide it once we can understand what once we see in writing what's been agreed to, and we'll try to comment back.
Great.
Back to heights. Back to heights. So we're
I'm 6 feet tall. Oh no, that's not what you mean. Okay.
All right. So council staff recommends retaining the current height limits with an option to request a waiver of up to 50 feet. Current height limits are in the current ZTA. That is a proposal. You can be 10 feet higher than the existing utility pole, right?
Yep, for parking lot lights and the pre-existing poles, correct.
Pre-existing, so you could increase that height by 10 feet. And then what did you mean by request a waiver of up to 50 feet?
So I should edit here, apologies. So the request a waiver could also mean if you're gonna have everyone go through the conditional use process instead. Basically, the standards that are here currently, if you want more than that, you can go through whichever alternative process the committee is recommending.
If you need more than 50 feet, you can try.
If you want up to 50 feet.
Up to 50 feet.
Beyond 50 feet, according to the Ninth Circuit, just to clarify, so I'm understanding this because we've been all over the place a little bit, that is the definition of a small cell tower. So that is the standard that we're using. It's not necessarily it has to be 50 feet in order to be a small cell, but the 50 feet is the small cell as defined in the Ninth Circuit rule.
Yes, so this was raised because one of the companies had said because the FCC defines a small cell as under 50 feet, that if there's some distance between these set standards and up and 50 feet, if there's some window in there that's not allowed, that would be materially inhibits. So basically this is saying we should create a way for, if you want to go up to 50 feet, then you go through whichever alternative process is voted on.
That's really helpful. So in other words, again, you are already allowed 10 feet in addition. So let's say you have a 35-foot pole existing, which is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
You can replace that pole up to 45 feet as limited use according to other limited use allowances. If you need to go to 50 feet, you can file for a waiver to go to 50 feet. Under what you're recommending.
You can file for a waiver, or based on what was decided earlier, if you're going to keep the conditional use process there, it could also be through the conditional use.
Or it could be through depending on whether, if you are a 40-foot distance, if you're 40 feet from the setback, you are a limited use. And at that point, well, you're saying it could be waiver for 50 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not resolved whether we would make it waiver or make it, okay, now you have to go to streamline conditional use to get your extra 5 feet.
Correct. That's the piece that's not resolved yet.
That's the piece that's not resolved. And I
is
think
for somebody whose pole is, so if your pole is 31 feet back and you can go up to 45, but you want to go to 50, right. Would the council like to go to conditional use or a waiver? Council staff recommend the waiver, but if it seems more streamlined with prior decision to go with conditional use,
Who would
That
grant a
makes
waiver?
sense.
Is that the same as the waiver and objection process?
Yes.
Okay. And then under that standard, a person within 300 feet could object and say, this is not the least obtrusive option. And if the hearing examiner determined that that was indeed correct, then they would deny the extra 5 feet or the 10 feet.
Yes.
Okay.
I was just going to say I'm fine with council staff's recommendation of the waiver and 50 feet, up to 50 feet.
All right. Any objection? No, I think we're good. All right. Council staff's recommendation. Okay. Let's move on to the next topic, which is modeling the compliant conditional use. Now, to restate the obvious, we have thus far agreed that that will apply in circumstances that are closer than 30 feet. And I think that's it, right? That's the parameters of where it would apply. All right, and then in the original draft ZTA, or whatever, the one before the staff recommendation, we had devised ideas about how to make the conditional use process compliant, or have the ability to be compliant. Have you recommended any changes in that, or are you using what was in the existing draft proposed ZTA?
Council staff is not recommending any changes to the already in place changes to the original process. Sorry, that was
clear. The original one, and the proposed one has never been adopted. So,
right.
Yeah. So
the 5 provisions about notice, planning, the findings, the Board of Appeals, the consolidated hearings, council staff recommends those stay in place.
Well, they're not in place. They are in the draft ZTA.
Sorry, those stay in the draft ZTA.
Right. We use the draft ZTA's proposal. Okay. So, we can talk about this. Do council members have any comments on this? Does anybody have any comments on this?
I'll just say quickly, as when Mr. Dew outlined it earlier, I'm fine with the process as outlined. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm as well. My whole thing from the beginning has been we have to be compliant, and I think this is a reasonable suggestion, and smarter people than I am have determined that this would allow us to meet the shot clock, and so I'd be comfortable with it as well.
Can I raise one point on clarification on the FCC rules? The requirement for the 50-foot only applies to small wireless facilities. So there are specific size limits on the antenna and the increases of equipment. So it's not that you have to permit everything under 50 feet. We have to permit things that are within a certain, the equipment and the antenna are within a certain size, and it's on a pole less than 50 feet.
I'm just confused. I thought we were talking about the standards of additional use. I think we already decided on height.
You've already moved on past height, and you're clarifying something. I don't know if. Thank you. Okay, let's move back to where we are, which is talking about a compliant conditional use process. So, I don't know. I guess any other comments here?
Sounds like you got two people agreeing. It's on.
Well, to be clear, this is what I had proposed previously. It sounds like it might be workable.
I think we're all agreeing. It doesn't sound like there's any disagreement here.
Okay. Good. All right. So we'll move on.
Can I ask that in our comments that we come back, and specifically you have language in there about the time restriction on the TFCG report? These structures may be ones that actually require more review, not less review, and you have a longer shot clock on some of these, particularly if they're new structures. So just to note that we would like to come back and make comments on that specific piece.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm open to getting all of that information. I haven't, like I said, it would have been nice to have now. And I realize we're dealing with a pandemic and everything's going on, and there's a lot happening. But so please, the more the better. It's an important decision point, and we should have all the information.
Amen. All right. Last topic, waiver and objection process. Libu, appreciate your staff recommendation with working with Pam and others. Very helpful innovation here. I think perhaps, I believe it may have been drawn a little bit from the ADU process we devised. Can you talk to us about what's involved here?
Yep, so the waiver and objection process, so basically, rather than having things go directly to a hearing examiner as they would under conditional use, it would only go to a hearing examiner if there was a waiver or an objection. Of course, this is separate from if it's under 30 feet, which we've already decided would have to go through the conditional use process. So if I am summarizing correctly, the committee has voted that if it's a new if it's new but otherwise meets the limited use standards, it would go through the waiver and objection process. I believe that's what the vote was.
And the basis of an objection is that it's not the least intrusive. What can you object to?
Yes, the objection would still be that same location X is better than location Y.
Okay. All right. So, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, so I just think it's really important, they're referenced here, but if you could just share, I think it would be helpful for those who are following along of what those objection standards would be. Obviously, height is one that was mentioned, but I know they're delineated in the ZTA, but I think it'd be helpful to clarify that. That is important. It's the basis of the process that we're now setting up.
I can read it directly. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the first is the setback. So this is the part that has now changed from the 60 to the 30 feet. And then there is the height as well. And then the tower must be located to minimize its visual impact. So the way it's phrased in the ZTA as drafted is the hearing examiner may require the tower to be less visually obtrusive by use of screen coloring or other visual mitigation options after the character of residential properties. And the ZTA as drafted actually says within 400 feet. So yeah, it's the design, the height, the setback is the way that the ZTA is currently drafted in terms of the standards that the hearing examiner is looking at. But at the end of the day, the hearing examiner's finding is still this location or that location.
And I know in the last work session, I thought we were, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but I thought we were going to get something tangible, which we have yet to receive. But it was mentioned that there were a number of, preferential pole placement standards, like utilizing major road versus a neighborhood road, not placed directly in front of a residence to protect the view shed, other standards like that. Are we able to set more specific standards than the ones that we have? I mean, what is the limitation here?
So the limitation is still always that does it material inhibit service and does it meet the shot clock? Those are still always the two major limitations. If the committee or council wants to add provisions regarding things such as wider streets and not narrower streets, or how far away from the front of a house, I think, what's it called? The view shed, sorry, is what I'm looking for. None of that is in the ZTA as currently drafted. I don't believe there'd be an issue in terms of the Ninth Circuit ruling with those types of provisions if it didn't materially inhibit service. So it would just depend what, I guess, the committee would want that language to look like.
Yeah, I think it would be, I think those two things in particular, I'm not sure if there are other areas of concern, but wouldn't prohibit it. It would just say that if there is an option that prevents it, that option should always be taken when available. So to me, if we could include that in the ZTA, I think that would be helpful within reason. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, can you state it again for me?
Well, one would be, it's basically preference. So it's basically just saying there's preference given to the, avoiding the view shed, preference given to, larger width of road when available, as long as it doesn't inhibit service. So basically, if there's two poles and you have an option, or there's two placements and there's an option, you would go with the option that's less obtrusive. If there's a way to do that, then I'd be interested. If there's not a way to do it, then there's not a way to do it.
But you're talking about in the limited use context, because I thought that we essentially are allowing that to happen for anything that's closer than 30 feet. We're saying, they have to demonstrate that it's the least obtrusive location, which I think would certainly be.
Well, I was talking about I thought that we already had that to a certain extent in the limited use. Maybe we could define it a little bit more specifically. I don't know if we need to do that or not. I was thinking of whether or not we had objective standards related to that in the waiver process. Because they can only look at the objective standards, and so if we don't set the objective standards, it can't be under consideration.
Well,
at least that's my understanding of how the process works. And so I was just proposing, if there was an option, or at least raising the issue, if there was an option or perhaps even a need to delineate out any of the objective standards related to preference given to one versus the other on the waiver process. Because the objection should be based on specific things, right? And it has to be. That's the standard. So you have to say, I'm objecting because there is this. I'm objecting because.
Well, so let me, in dialogue here. I believe that what we're saying is that you can object if you believe it's not the least obtrusive location. And that is a fairly broad right. At the same time, it is a constrained right because there still has to be an installation somewhere.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
So that I believe that would cover the concerns that you're raising, that, hey, you're putting this in front of my house. There is a side lot over there that's not in front of anybody's house, still provides coverage to the area. It's less obtrusive. That's the appropriate place. I think you would win that argument, in the process that we are designing. You could also argue that I'm near the corner, and right around the corner is an arterial with higher towers, and there's no real impact to put it over there. That's less obtrusive. I think you win that. You might win that case. So,
I think my question would be of whether or not the less obtrusive is clear enough to be able to provide the process that we want. That was that's basically the issue that
well, maybe we would turn to our, ask Ms. Nadeau, but I would tend to think, and I'm not a lawyer, that we would want to be a little broader to allow it to be, devised through a iterative process, with the experts at the table. But that was my kind of general orientation here. But let's ask our staff what they think.
So I think two things have come up. So one is that in the waiver objection process, the hearing examiner would be looking at the three different, or however many were proposed locations, and picking the one that's the least visually obtrusive. So that's already built in there. The issue is there's nothing about visually obtrusive in the limited use standards, because limited use has to be objective. I'm not sure how easy or doable it would be to put.
Let me pause you there. I was not implying that I supported providing additional restrict or qualifications into the limited use. I think that by definition.
Okay, so I think you answered my question, that in the objection and waiver process, that you think that it's already set up to accomplish what we were intending, which was really the nature of my question.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't want to, in the interest of not talking about things that I don't need. Can I a separate item that does relate to limited use is the question of preference. And I know other jurisdictions and proliferation. So like in DC, for instance, there's a standard of 150 feet. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if now is an appropriate time to raise this.
Sure.
But the DC standard is the same person or company can't deploy poles less than 150 feet apart under limited use. That's my understanding of it. Am I understanding it correctly?
That is my understanding of I don't know if it's DC or PG County, but yes.
Yeah. So maybe it's Prince George's County. So, and there are other jurisdictions that have similar standards like that to address the proliferation standard. I think to a certain point, the market will resolve some of that because you're not going to deploy more, cell towers than you need to get the optimal level of service because it comes with cost. But I do think there's some value to this to address the challenge of proliferation that some are concerned about. So two questions. One, could we do something similar in our zoning code? It seems that if Prince George's and other jurisdictions can, that we could. And number two, they have it of the same company. Is it possible to do it a certain standard, maybe less space, but of other companies too? So it's not the same person or the same company, but it's if there's already an existing pole here that you couldn't put a pole next to it. I'm just trying to understand what the possibilities would be.
Let's ask how that is presently addressed. So my understanding is that the Tower Committee seeks to require co-location whenever possible. And so let's find out from the executive branch how they would address that proliferation issue, without an additional standard in the ZTA first, and then we can discuss whether an additional standard is needed. So to the executive branch, who can talk about how the Tower Committee and authorities and process to address non-proliferation, which has always been a primary function, is my understanding of the Tower Committee, is to say we don't want multiple companies putting up installations on the same block. We want them to use the same pole and therefore have less equipment.
The general enforcement of the following the county policy and the code is that what the current policy is designed to do is to limit the proliferation of new installation, new poles, and instead attach to existing structures. That is the primary thing. So when you ask if somebody wants to come in and attach something new, build something new, you will ask, was there any other existing structure that you could have attached to? There is not a policy that requires that you have more things on one pole. And in order to place more, so there's two situations you're going to have when you're trying to get people on the same pole. In some cases, you have somebody like Crown Castle, who is they're an infrastructure provider. So they design their equipment so that I could host antennas that serve 3 different carriers. When AT&T or Verizon comes in and builds or puts their own structure out there, they are not trying to design it so that it accommodates other carriers. And it might be difficult to require that Verizon design its antenna in a way that's going to support some other carrier's equipment, because they're not in the business of supporting other people's equipment. In addition, unless you have a pole, when you look at a pole that, say, Crown Castle is designing, it's designed for multiple carriers, you're sort of designed to place them, or you're using a shared antenna in different spectrum. When separate carriers come in and attach to the same pole, what they typically want is a separation distance between their antennas so that they function properly. And that usually requires that you have taller poles. So the trade-off is, if you allow more carriers to have their individual poles, you can have shorter poles. If you require people to use the same pole, you need a taller pole. In areas where you have underground utilities and existing poles of 14 feet, the goal there was to have shorter poles and to not have poles. You're much better in a neighborhood if you've got a height increase of 10, 20 feet as opposed to going up to 50 feet. It will stand out a lot more in a neighborhood, and it's less compatible.
So is it your view that the issue of co-location and existing pole preference is addressed through the tower committee? That it wouldn't need to be addressed, or wouldn't be appropriately addressed in the ZTA?
Well, let me clarify what we're talking about here. We're talking about conditional use only, right?
I was talking about generally, but.
Okay, well.
Can you speak to it generally, Mitzi?
Okay, so generally speaking, if you create a waiver process that allows you to put in new poles at taller heights, then you created an incentive to install new poles. If you're saying that the waiver process is going to be for, I want a waiver of an existing height limit for a replacement structure, it may be even. But I'm not clear on, I guess the answer to your question, Councilman Friedson, is no. We need some clear direction about what is the policy that we should be enforcing. The current policy is to use existing structures versus putting in new ones.
So let me just comment here. That's why I think this one is ambiguous. I think what we want is the least obtrusive installations in general. But if we require one, like you push on the balloon in one direction, it pops out in the other. Are neighborhoods going to be happier with, a taller pole that has more equipment on it, or
okay, so I would say
moderately high poles with
right.
Smaller installations on each equipment? Because also when you put more equipment on one pole, you have to have a bigger pole. It's just it is.
So I would say that least obtrusive in general in the conversations we've had has not been about the amount, aside from a fixed size limit of equipment. The least obtrusive characteristics tend to be things like, if you have a neighborhood that has a greenway abutting one side of the neighborhood and houses on the other, that I put it on the side where there's a greenway. If you have a cluster of trees that you could sit in and the antenna is a little bit more masked than if I stuck it out in the middle of an open area, that would be less obtrusive. Is there a place like you have already some kind of other infrastructure in which if you're adding it into that area of infrastructure, it would be less noticeable? That would be less obtrusive. And it's setting aside the issue of the design of the pole, but those we covered through a different section. So those have generally been the things that you look up of being less obtrusive. There can be some areas where you can have a pole that may be closer, but it's in a cluster of trees as opposed to something that's further, but it stands off by itself. And so it would be less obtrusive if it was a little bit more disguised. Those have been
I do think
things
a
that we've
preference
talked
to
about.
co-location is preferable when possible. I think we're recognizing that that's not always possible.
Could also push co-location and preferences by differentiating by tiers, as you were suggesting, Councilman Friedson. And you could have a higher height pole on a larger street. So you could make it either a limited use or simply make it higher on a larger street, which may then be able to provide the service you need if you can connect from larger poles to larger poles. So that's one way. And there is currently a preference for co-location, but it does raise issues about where that co-location occurs. And so you could also give a preference away from residential structures, whether that would be in parks or parkland.
Okay, so I would suggest that language either and or if council staff, if the executive branch has any suggestions here on this co-location preference, I'd be happy to take a look at that. I think right now we're kind of talking in theoretical terms, and we need to be actually talking about specific things to either include or not include in the process. I will say I've heard lots of complaints about the tower committee and the way that it works. I don't know where we are, more than 2 years in of revamping that. I know that the county executive was intending to make changes. I haven't heard a lot of positive responses from residents that they've seen any of the changes that have been made. So I don't know if there's an update there. But before we get to that, I would like to include personally the 150-foot language. I think that would be helpful. It happens in other jurisdictions. I think it's reasonable to happen here. It addresses the proliferation concern without, from my perspective, at least materially inhibiting service.
That's 100. That is, one company cannot put an antenna closer than 150 feet to their own installation or to any other installation.
Well, if we adopt the same language that's done in another jurisdiction, it would be their own.
Okay.
Their own. I don't know if they're. I don't know what the opportunity or ability would be if you made it all. I mean, I think Mitzi raised some concerns with the practicality of that, given some you want them to be together, because they would put them on the same pole, and that might actually resolve.
Well, let me give you the more likely scenario. At least this is how it's played out in the commercial areas, and this is something that we learned after in sort of trying to apply it. Sometimes there are intersections in which everybody wants to be at that intersection. It's not so much in front of somebody's house, but let's say you have Great Seneca Highway and some crossing. Right? The intersection is helpful because the antennas, they work like pie slices. They're not circles in terms of where they offer service. So when you put it at the intersection, it gives you a kind of wider area of service. And it might be that you've got one provider who wants to be on one corner and another provider who wants to be on an opposite corner and a third on a third corner. And I think those are things that you would want to allow. But if you're talking about in front of somebody's house, then yes, it makes much more sense to say, if you put one in front of this house, then there should not be another one for another 150 feet. So I think, and that's some kind of language that potentially could be worked through, but I think it's the intersections and your ability to have them. And those are areas in which, as Debbie said, ways in which you're trying to encourage them to go to some places. So maybe you can allow them there closer. And in places where you want to discourage them or make them as choice of last resort, there's the distance requirement.
Let me say, I think, this requires some additional careful work. I think the general idea of avoiding over proliferation, philosophically, I think we can all agree. I would observe, as Councilmember Friedson said, companies don't overbuild their network because it costs a lot of money to build the network, and so they only build what they actually need. But let's just be very careful here. For example, restricting, I don't know if this is what was suggested or not, but restricting one company's antenna proximity to another company makes co-location problematic. So
I would just raise. So I would like to move the Prince George's language. Like, I think we can adopt the same language as done in Prince George's, which is a small wireless facility shall not be located within 150 feet of the nearest small wireless facility occupied or controlled by the same person.
By the same company.
Yeah, it's person in the code, but it means company.
Okay. All right. I don't object to that. That's
Okay, so let's pursue that. If there are other thoughts or options related to encouraging co-location, encouraging, preference to higher intensity areas like the intersection, that you raised, then, I'd be interested in seeing that. If there is a thoughtful way to address the same issue that better achieves the goal without inhibiting co-location, which, on existing poles, which is what we really want to encourage. I'd be open. I'd be open to, additional language on that, but at least for now, I think let's pursue the Prince George's County language. And if there are other options to address the proliferation issue further, then I'd be happy to have staff provide them or the executive branch provide them for our consideration.
okay.
Work?
Yeah. Councilmember Tondo, I don't know if you've had to step away yet or if you're still with us.
Fine with that.
Okay, so we have an amended ZTA. I know that Councilmember Jawando was a no vote or a different vote on a couple of items. So we have an amended ZTA before us. Any objection to the amended ZTA? Okay, so we have unanimous committee vote in favor of the amended ZTA, and Councilmember Jawando, says that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, just as long as the other things are noted, and again, to the executive staff, please get back to us before we take it to full council.
Okay, very good. Well, this was very productive. Thank you. Appreciate my colleagues' work here. Thank you to council staff. Really marvelous job. And really nice. Thank you, Ms. Dedeau. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to the executive staff. So onward. I'll just note, we will need legislation around the fees and stuff, the various fees. And so we are working on that. I think the ideal scenario would be we do everything together at the full council. That would be, we'll just have to huddle up on drafting that and what the timing could be for doing that. So in other words, this does not go to the full council next week or something like that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Appreciate it. I'm gonna take a call now. Okay. Take care.